Hello, everyone, friends. We've started the week in the markets, and on this opening day, we can see that the crisis atmosphere continues across all markets. There aren't any particularly optimistic data coming from the US or Europe. In some economic indicators, we see that growth is slowing down and that interest rate cuts are at risk. While employment remains strong in some data, after the recent rise in oil prices, the room for maneuver has actually become limited. There's a significant restriction on the actions central banks can take. In fact, in Europe, instead of talking about rate cuts, discussions have started about when they might need to raise rates. That's what's on their agenda right now. The US Federal Reserve is in the same boat, uncertain. Actually, maybe uncertain isn't the right word, because even in the best case scenario, a rate cut doesn't seem possible at the moment. In other words, unless the market enters an economic crisis, a rate cut doesn't look likely. But from what I see, and what I believe is certain, is that there is at least a small crisis atmosphere in the markets right now. That's why, during this period, portfolios need to be adjusted and structured accordingly. It's important to act in a way that avoids risks. In fact, I have a humble saying just for times like these. Sometimes I say that missing an opportunity is better than taking a loss, and this saying is especially true for times like these, because in my opinion, it's necessary to be extra cautious in the markets right now. Sales are continuing on the US stock markets, even if cautiously. We've seen that technology stocks, in particular, are under serious pressure. We've observed moves that are essentially profit-taking. We've also seen that major funds share a similar perspective. They're also taking steps to reduce risk and balance their portfolios. So when we look at the overall picture in the markets, even though there's no clear sense of panic, cautious moves to reduce positions are still ongoing. Putting those aside, I'd like to move on to the topic of the petro yuan. There's actually some fresh news on this front as well. In its latest statement, Iran said only ships trading in yuan will be allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. We do not permit the use of the dollar in this region. That's the statement they made. This is already an issue being acted upon with the shared mindset of the BRICS members. Their common philosophy is that they don't trust the dollar and believe the dollar will collapse. And of course, the mastermind behind this idea is China, because China says we are the world's largest importer of oil. That's why we want to conduct all our trade entirely in yuan. That's what they're saying. We can say that not only are they the masterminds behind this idea, but this is also exactly where it all started. And this topic has become one of the most frequently discussed issues in recent days. So where are we headed in the markets now? Which stock exchanges are risky? Which markets carry lower risk? Which of these specific ones are in a zone where a trend break might potentially occur? Let's take a look at each of these one by one, friends. Before we dive in, as always, I'd like to ask for your support with likes and comments. If you check under the video, you'll see there are a ton of bots. We really need your help and support in this tough battle. We're fighting against them. First, I want to take a look at the current situation on the Borsa Istanbul side. Look, on the daily chart, there was a point in the trend I follow where I mentioned that the trend was starting to weaken. We talked about this last week. I'm reducing my positions. I'm making my selling moves here. Just like I did in the American stock market, I had said that I was gradually exiting from here as well. Of course, the place where we talk about this in more detail is the YouTube membership chats, the live broadcast there. But still, as you know, I try to provide information here for everyone as well. In my opinion, the ongoing geopolitical crisis, the uncertainty about when the war environment will end, and on top of that, the fact that oil has once again moved above the $100 level, all increase the risks even further. Look, on the daily chart in Borsa Istanbul, as I said, after reaching the resistance level on my cloud indicator, Borsa Istanbul hasn't managed to achieve a clear gain here. I pointed this area out in the previous broadcast as well. From here, it clearly turned downward. Right now, it's entered a weak zone. That's why, especially while the geopolitical crisis continues, I won't be making a new assessment or giving a positive comment about Borsa Istanbul. On the weekly chart, we can say that the support zone for Borsa Istanbul is at the 11,500 level. In the coming period, this level will likely reach the 12,000 zone. But overall, as I said, my outlook on Borsa Istanbul is similar to what I mentioned about the American stock market. Look, when we check out the NASDAQ 100, we've also seen a slow, gradual downward movement there for a while now. Even though the index itself has only shown a slight decline, we've seen that the drop in tech stocks has been much deeper recently. Of course, if we ask whether there's a similar situation in gold while all this selling is going on, the answer is yes. Gold is experiencing the same thing. Selling pressure on gold has also continued during this period. On my indicator, every cloud level we've tracked recently has turned into a buying opportunity. Today, gold has clearly entered that cloud level. In my opinion, gold's in a fairly attractive price range today for making some new acquisitions. We can say that the current support level here for gold is $4,910. Of course, if there are closes below the cloud region, that would technically put gold in a somewhat risky position. But when we look at the geopolitical environment, gold is one of the most popular products among the ones we're following. Of course, there's also a potential breakout move in the cryptocurrency market. I'll talk about that in a bit as well. But like I said, when managing preferences in this global chaos, I think one of the smartest moves would be to buy gold gradually. I don't have the same outlook for silver's ounce price at the moment, because even though silver showed a good rise after the potential buying level around $70, it couldn't maintain that upward move. We had discussed that if 83.63 was lost here, silver would also enter a problematic phase in terms of trend. Look, after losing this level, we can see that the selling has continued. Here, in the same way, the support level for silver will also be in the $70 to $73 range. As I mentioned in previous videos, within this perspective we're following right now, I don't see silver in a positive trend like gold. But if we see a suitable environment, I'll talk about new buying opportunities in silver as well, or I'll mention them. Let me show you oil as well. In American crude oil, since the last area we discussed, we've seen it start a new upward wave. Here, $80 was an important support level. After touching the cloud area, it showed a strong rise from there. So after this drop, we talked about this area in oil. Of course, before that, we talked about the $55 and $67 regions in oil. Those who evaluated and took positions here made good profits. In today's price scale, we can say that the current support level for oil is roughly $94, but the main support is $91. So what does this mean? If $91 is lost, oil would put its upward trend at risk. But as I pointed out just a short while ago, the upward trend in oil is steadily moving upward. Oil is still firmly holding within this established pattern. I also want to briefly show the VIX index, because after the recent rise here, investors need to clearly notice and understand the price volatility happening in the markets. Look, when we check this index here, whenever it goes above 23, when it's in the 23 to 30 range, there is significant price volatility in the markets, and this applies to all markets. Every product contains what we call high volatility, meaning high price fluctuations. Because of this, you might start to panic and pull out of the markets. But what you really need to do is just take the right steps, sit back, and keep watching the markets. Look, if you're wondering what the latest situation is in the crypto market after this volatility, according to the cloud indicator on my chart, Bitcoin has now risen above the red cloud. Of course, I had mentioned the need for a daily close above the $73,200 level here, but we're also seeing increased positivity in other indicators. I'll talk about that in a moment, but I also want to mention Bitcoin's current support level here. $70,919 is Bitcoin's current support level. $66,000 is no longer a support zone, and within the gap that Bitcoin has entered, it has started to carve out some space for a nice upward move. We're seeing similar situations with the major altcoins alongside Bitcoin. We're seeing the same situations with Ethereum, XRP, and Solana. There's also significant movement in Tether dominance. Now, let me show them to you one by one. Look, when we check Ethereum, it's clearly above the cloud indicator. The level it broke, $2,129, has now become a support zone. And I think there's a significant gap area in each of these assets. Look, when we get to XRP, we also see that it's above the cloud indicator. $1.43 is the current support level. And right ahead, the $1.51 level is acting as resistance. A similar situation is happening with Solana as well. Look, Solana has also broken through the resistance area at $91 here. It's also above the cloud indicator. In my opinion, the cryptocurrency market has entered a very positive zone. One of the data points we use to confirm this is, of course, Tether dominance. Look, after Tether dominance reached the area we call the historical peak, we talked about how it reacted from there and couldn't break through. We saw these wicks, which we call needles, right here. Afterwards, we saw that it was in a breakdown movement on the daily time frame. Look, it dropped below the cloud indicator. It closed below it here. So we can say this is a picture showing us the process where money is starting to flow from cash into crypto. It looks like money is starting to flow not only into Bitcoin, but also into Ethereum, XRP, Solana, and altcoins in general. When we look at the chart we call Total 3, which covers the overall altcoin market, we see a similar breakout in the market cap of altcoins other than Bitcoin and Ethereum. We can see that it's sitting right above the resistance level, right above the cloud region. So the conditions are now in place in the crypto market for more positive moves. At least that's what I see when I look at the charts. And last week we had the chance to prepare for this. We talked about these things in the YouTube members chat. We analyzed the US stock market, Borsa Istanbul, and the movements of gold and silver in detail. We took the best possible actions for the situations that unfolded, sat back, and now we're continuing to watch how the markets are moving. And when we look at Bitcoin dominance, we see that Bitcoin dominance is also continuing its movements below the cloud region. We can say that this is a factor that could push altcoins like Ethereum, XRP, Solana, and other altcoins a bit higher. If Bitcoin dominance closes below the 57.5% level, we can say that these markets could see even more upward movement. Other than that, there's nothing else to add on the opening day of the week. The trends I follow in the markets are very clear. Even though there are geopolitical crises, even if the global outlook is so foggy that we can't see ahead, and even if data coming from the US and Europe creates serious chaos in the markets, I continue to stick to the trends I personally follow, not just for the cryptocurrency market, but as I discuss all markets, I also trade in all of them. And like a head coach, I try to share my thoughts with you here and in detail with YouTube members in the YouTube members chat. From here on out, it's all up to you, my friends. Other than that, there's nothing else I can add. No matter what the prices are, I hope you're always in good spirits. See you in the next video. Take care of yourselves. By subscribing to my channel and turning on notifications, you're actually making an incredibly valuable investment tip for yourself. Before you dive headfirst into these new opportunities,